Friday evening started like any other. Lily stood in front of the mirror, humming a tune as she slipped into her favorite blue dress, the one that always caught my eye. I couldn't help but admire her as she got ready. The years hadn't dimmed her beauty, and seeing her excitement for her college reunion brought a smile to my face. "You're sure you don't want to come?" she teased, applying a final swipe of lipstick. "Nah, I'm good," I replied, leaning back into the couch. "You go have fun. Someone has to hold down the fort." It wasn't unusual for us to do our own things on the weekends. I trusted her. I'd always trusted her. As she left, I went about my evening, content with the quiet solitude. Hours passed, and the night stretched into darkness. I scrolled through social media, half expecting to see one of Lily's typical updates, a photo with her friends, a cheeky caption about reliving the good old days. But my feed was empty. It wasn't unusual, I told myself. Not everything needed to be shared online. Still, a faint unease stirred in my chest. I dismissed it and turned my attention to the TV. But as the hours crept closer to midnight, my unease grew. By 1:30 a.m., she still wasn't home. I sent her a quick text. "Everything okay?" The message remained unread. By 2 a.m., I began pacing the living room, glancing at the clock every few minutes. She'd stayed out late before, but something about tonight felt different. I checked my phone again. Still no response. At 3:30 a.m., the sound of the front door unlocking jolted me. I sat up straighter as Lily stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. "You're still awake?" she asked, startled. "Yeah," I replied, keeping my voice even. "How was the reunion?" She hesitated, a flicker of something crossing her face before she shrugged. "It was fun. Long night, though." Her tone was casual, but something about her demeanor felt off. She avoided eye contact as she slipped out of her heels, heading straight to the bedroom without waiting for a response. As I sat there, staring at the empty doorway, that unease settled deeper into my chest. Something wasn't right, and for the first time, I let doubt creep into my mind. The house was eerily silent the morning after Lily's night out. She moved around the kitchen with an air of normalcy, humming as she poured her coffee, but I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my chest. I replayed the previous night in my head. Her hesitations, the odd tone in her voice, the way she slipped past me without offering the usual details about her evening. Lily wasn't one to shy away from recounting her adventures, but this time, she'd been unervingly tight-lipped. I couldn't bring myself to confront her outright. Instead, I decided to watch and wait. Later that day, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the counter. It wasn't like me to invade her privacy, but the gnawing suspicion drove me to glance at the screen. A single name appeared. Ethan. The message preview read, "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." My heart plummeted. The air seemed to drain from the room as the words sank in. Ethan? Who the hell was Ethan? I locked the screen and stepped away from the counter just as Lily walked into the kitchen, wrapped in a towel, her hair damp from the shower. "What are you up to?" she asked, her tone casual. "Just making some tea," I lied, forcing a smile. She didn't seem to notice the strain in my voice, too preoccupied with drying her hair. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I couldn't focus on anything, my mind replaying that message over and over again. Ethan. Amazing. Can't wait to see you again. I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation, but the context was damning. I decided that I needed answers. That night, after Lily went to bed, I logged into our shared phone account. I hesitated, feeling a pang of guilt, but my need for clarity outweighed my discomfort. The call logs told a story I wasn't ready to hear. Late-night conversations, frequent messages, and repeated calls, all to the same number. Ethan. I scrolled further, my stomach tightening with every entry. There were texts I couldn't see, but the patterns were enough to confirm my worst fears. This wasn't just some casual acquaintance. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling. I stared at the dark screen, feeling a mix of anger, betrayal, and a sickening sadness. Lily had always been my partner, my confidant. I had trusted her implicitly, never doubting her loyalty. But now, that trust was fractured, and I couldn't ignore the evidence staring me in the face. I stayed awake that night, lying on the couch, my mind racing. I had to confront her, but I needed more. I couldn't go into this half-cocked. If Lily was hiding something, I was going to find out. The following day, Lily moved about the house as though nothing had changed. She hummed while folding laundry, occasionally glancing at her phone and typing away with a small smile on her face. Every tap of her fingers felt like a knife in my chest. I needed more than call logs to confront her. I needed undeniable proof, something that would leave no room for excuses or lies. That evening, after Lily went to bed, I returned to our shared phone account. This time, I explored the details of her data usage. It wasn't long before I noticed a recurring location ping, somewhere across town, a coffee shop we rarely visited. Curious, I searched for the coffee shop online and discovered it was a boutique cafe known for its cozy ambience and discreet booths. I didn't confront Lily immediately. Instead, I began piecing together the puzzle. Over the next few days, I noticed patterns. Her cheerful demeanor would peak on certain evenings, aligning perfectly with the times she frequented the cafe. My suspicion grew until one evening when she announced she'd be going out again. Another reunion? I asked casually, masking the bitterness in my voice. She hesitated, her eyes briefly darting away before responding. Just catching up with an old friend? I nodded, playing the part of the trusting husband. When she left, I followed. I trailed her car at a safe distance, my palms slick with sweat as my heart thudded against my ribs. She drove across town, eventually pulling into the coffee shop's parking lot. I parked a few spaces away, keeping my head low as I watched her step out of the car. She looked different, her posture confident, her movements deliberate. She wasn't dressed for a casual meetup. This wasn't the woman who sat across from me at breakfast, sipping coffee in sweatpants. Minutes later, a man approached her. Ethan. He was tall, with a sharp jawline and an easy smile. He greeted her with a hug that lingered too long, his hand brushing the small of her back as they entered the cafe together. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I sat in the car, watching through the windshield. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, a mixture of anger and heartbreak. But I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the moment for confrontation. I waited for an hour, watching their silhouettes through the cafe's windows. They leaned in close, laughing and talking like lovers. My stomach churned as I watched her reach across the table to touch his hand. When they finally left, they embraced in the parking lot. It wasn't a friendly hug. It was intimate, her face buried in his chest as his arms wrapped around her. I waited until they both drove away before I followed Lily home, staying a few cars behind to ensure she didn't suspect anything. That night, as she slipped into bed beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The image of her with Ethan replayed in my mind like a nightmare on repeat. I now had my proof, but the pain of it was almost unbearable. The woman I had loved and trusted had betrayed me in the most intimate way. Tomorrow, I decided, would be the day I confronted her. I needed to hear the truth from her lips, no matter how much it hurt. The morning light streamed through the bedroom window, illuminating the silence that hung between us. I watched Lily as she moved around the room, humming softly to herself, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I couldn't pretend anymore. The confrontation I had dreaded and planned for was inevitable. Over breakfast, I decided to keep things calm, to approach her with composure. I sipped my coffee, letting the warmth settle my nerves. She scrolled through her phone, smiling faintly at something on the screen. Lily, I began, my voice steady, though my hands trembled beneath the table. She glanced up, her expression curious but guarded. Yes? How was your coffee date last night? Her fork froze midway to her mouth. What do you mean? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. I continued, leaning forward slightly, you seem to enjoy yourself. That cafe must be nice. You've been going there a lot lately, haven't you? Her cheeks flushed, but she quickly composed herself, setting her fork down. It was fine. Just catching up with an old friend. Ethan? I said, the name slicing through the air like a knife. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she masked her shock with a weak smile. Who? I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Don't play dumb, Lily. I saw you. I followed you last night. I saw everything. The color drained from her face. You followed me? I nodded, my gaze unflinching. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to trust you, but you gave me no choice. Her lips parted as if to argue, but no words came out. She stared at me, her hands trembling as she fumbled for an excuse. It's not what you think, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then tell me, I challenged, my tone cold. What exactly is it, Lily? Because from where I was sitting, it looked like you were on a date with another man. She dropped her gaze, her silence confirming everything I already knew. Do you love him? I asked, my voice cracking despite my efforts to stay composed. Her head snapped up, and for a moment, I saw guilt flash in her eyes. Alex, do you love him? I repeated, my voice firm now, demanding an answer. She hesitated, and the weight of her pause crushed me. I don't know, she finally admitted, her voice breaking. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. You don't know? I repeated, anger bubbling to the surface. After everything we've been through, you don't even know if you love me anymore? Alex, please, she begged, standing and reaching for me. It's not that simple. I stepped back, out of her reach. You're right, I said bitterly. It's not simple. It's betrayal. You didn't just betray me, Lily. You betrayed our marriage, our trust, everything we built together. Tears streamed down her face, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I didn't mean for it to happen, she sobbed. It just did. I shook my head, the pain and anger swirling in my chest. That's not good enough, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. I deserve better than this. Alex, I'm sorry, she cried, her voice desperate. I'll end it. I'll never see him again. Please, just give me another chance. But her words felt hollow, like a bandage over a wound too deep to heal. It's too late, Lily, I said, my voice heavy with finality. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her sobbing at the table. I needed space, time to process everything. The woman I had loved and trusted had shattered our life together, and there was no going back. As I stepped outside, the cool morning air hit my face, but it did little to numb the pain. I knew this was just the beginning of the end, and I wasn't sure if I had the strength to face what came next. I spent the rest of the day driving aimlessly, my mind a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and disbelief. The betrayal clung to me like a second skin, and no matter how far I drove, I couldn't shake the weight of it. By the time the sun began to set, I found myself parked in an empty lot, staring blankly at the horizon. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced at the screen. Lily's name illuminated, the notifications piling up like bricks in a wall I refused to tear down. Calls, texts, desperate pleas for forgiveness. I ignored them all. Eventually, I returned home. The house was quiet when I stepped inside, eerily so. Lily was sitting on the couch, her tear-streaked face illuminated by the glow of the television, which played silently in the background. She looked up at me, her expression a mixture of hope and fear. Alex, she started, her voice soft and trembling. We need to talk. I sighed, leaning against the doorway. What's there to talk about, Lily? You made your choices. What else is left to say? I'm sorry, she said, standing and approaching me cautiously. I was stupid, selfish, and I wasn't thinking clearly. I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. Do you think that erases what you did? Do you think saying sorry is enough to fix this? Tears welled up in her eyes again, but this time I didn't feel the urge to comfort her. I know it's not enough, she admitted, but I love you, Alex. I love us. I want to fix this. Please, just give me a chance. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. You say you love me, but you didn't think about that love when you were sneaking around with him. You didn't think about us when you lied to my face. So forgive me if I find it hard to believe you now. She sank back onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I was wrong, she whispered. I've never felt more ashamed in my life. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to yell, to scream, to demand answers, but what was the point? Nothing she said would undo the betrayal. Nothing would erase the image of her with another man. After a long moment, I finally spoke. Why him? My voice was quieter than I intended, almost a whisper. Why Ethan? She looked up at me, her face etched with regret. I don't know, she admitted. He was just there. I felt like we were drifting apart, and he paid attention to me in a way that I don't know how to explain it. That's a cop-out, I snapped, my anger flaring. You don't accidentally betray someone you love. You made a choice, Lily. Own it. She flinched at my words, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of defiance in her eyes. I'm not excusing what I did, she said, her voice firmer now. But you've been distant too, Alex. You bury yourself in work, and sometimes it feels like you're not even here. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. So this is my fault now? Is that what you're saying? No, she exclaimed, standing again. That's not what I mean. I felt invisible, Alex. And Ethan made me feel seen. I stared at her, the woman I had once trusted with my whole heart, and realized I didn't recognize her anymore. Well, I hope he was worth it, I said coldly, because you've destroyed everything we had. She reached for me, but I stepped back. Please, Alex, she begged. Don't give up on us. I didn't give up on us, I said, my voice breaking. You did. With that, I turned and walked away, retreating to the sanctuary of the bedroom. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, my chest heaving with the effort to keep my emotions in check. The bed we once shared now felt like a battlefield, and I didn't know how to navigate the wreckage. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our relationship in my mind. I thought about the love we once had, the dreams we built together, and how easily it all crumbled. I wanted to hate her, to erase every memory of her from my heart, but it wasn't that simple. Love doesn't disappear overnight, no matter how much it's been tarnished. As the hours ticked by, I made a decision. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep living like this. Whether it meant salvaging what was left of our marriage or walking away for good, I needed clarity. And that clarity wouldn't come from more arguments or unanswered questions. It would come from within. Tomorrow, I would start taking back control of my life. The next morning, the sunlight creeping through the blinds felt like a cruel reminder of the mess my life had become. I dragged myself out of bed, my body heavy with exhaustion from a night of tossing and turning. The house was quiet, too quiet. I found Lily in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up at me, but I avoided her gaze, heading straight for the coffee pot. Good morning, she said hesitantly, her voice cracking. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The words wouldn't come, and even if they did, I wasn't sure they'd be kind. Instead, I focused on the mundane act of pouring coffee, pretending she wasn't there. But the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. Alex, she began, her voice trembling. I know you're hurting, and I know I'm the reason why. But can we please just talk? Really talk? I finally turned to face her, the anger simmering just below the surface. What's there to talk about, Lily? You cheated. You lied. And now you want to talk? She flinched, but I didn't care. She needed to feel the weight of what she'd done. I want to explain, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I laughed bitterly. Explain? What's there to explain? You betrayed me during the hardest time of my life. That's not something you can explain away, Lily. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I saw the woman I used to love, the woman who used to be my partner, my confidant. But then I remembered the messages, the lies, the betrayal, and the anger surged back. I made a mistake, she said, her voice breaking. A terrible mistake. But I never stopped loving you, Alex. I set my coffee cup down with more force than I intended, the sound echoing in the silence. You don't get to use love as an excuse, I snapped. You don't get to say you love me while sneaking around with someone else. I know, she said, her tears falling freely now. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you to give me a chance to make this right. I stared at her, torn between the love I once felt for her and the deep sense of betrayal that had taken its place. Why now, Lily? I asked, my voice softer but no less accusing. Why are you suddenly so desperate to fix things? She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. You found out about the inheritance, didn't you? I said, my voice cold and detached. Her eyes widened in shock, but she quickly tried to compose herself. What? No, Alex, it's not about the money. Don't lie to me, I said, cutting her off. I know you found out. Suddenly, after months of ignoring me, you're here begging for a second chance. Do you really expect me to believe that's a coincidence? She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. I leaned against the counter, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. You're unbelievable, I said, shaking my head. You didn't come back because you love me. You came back because you saw an opportunity. That's not true, she cried, her voice rising. I made a mistake, Alex, but I came back because I realized how much I need you, how much we need each other. I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and devoid of humor. You need me now because you think I can give you the life you've always wanted. But where were you when I needed you, Lily? Where were you when my world was falling apart? She looked down at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. I was scared, she admitted. I didn't know how to handle everything. I thought Ethan was an escape. An escape, I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. You escaped while I was drowning. Her tears came harder now, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no pity, just emptiness. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm so sorry. I pushed off the counter, standing tall as I looked at her. Sorry isn't enough, I said firmly. Not this time. She reached out to me, but I stepped back. You made your choice, Lily, and now I'm making mine. With that, I left the kitchen, leaving her standing there alone. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. I knew this wasn't over, not yet. There was still the divorce to deal with, the legal battles, and the endless questions from friends and family. But for the first time in months, I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. She had made her bed, and now she would have to lie in it. As for me, I was done being her safety net. It was time to move forward, with or without her. The following days passed in a haze of legal consultations and deep introspection. I'd already contacted my lawyer, and the divorce proceedings were underway. Lily's sudden attempts to reach me had gone from desperate pleas to calculated manipulation. Every message she sent was laced with promises of change, sprinkled with feigned remorse. I saw right through it. My lawyer, Jessica, laid out the steps we needed to take. You're in a strong position, Alex. The evidence of infidelity, your financial stability, and her sudden reappearance are all in your favor. We'll make sure she can't take advantage of your inheritance. I nodded, grateful for her straightforwardness. Let's move quickly. I want this over with. Despite my determination, there was no escaping the emotional weight of it all. Every piece of paperwork, every meeting, felt like another wound being reopened. But I refused to let her see that. I had to stay strong, not just for the legal battle but for myself. Lily, however, wasn't backing down. She showed up at the house one evening, uninvited. I hadn't seen her since our confrontation in the kitchen, and the sight of her standing on my porch was enough to reignite the anger simmering beneath my calm exterior. Alex, please, she said, her voice trembling. Can we just talk? Just give me 5 minutes. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. 5 minutes, I said coldly. She took a deep breath, tears welling up in her eyes. I know I hurt you. I know I made terrible mistakes, but I'm here because I want to fix this. I want to fix us. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. Fix us? You mean after you tore us apart? After you left me when I needed you most? Spare me, Lily. Her tears fell freely now, but I couldn't tell if they were genuine or part of her performance. I was lost, Alex, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't know how to handle everything. I made a mistake, a huge mistake. But I love you. I always have. I laughed bitterly. Love? You don't get to call it love when you walked out on me and into another man's arms. I know, she whispered, her head hanging low, but I see things clearly now. I was selfish. I was stupid. But we have so much history, Alex. Doesn't that count for something? History doesn't excuse betrayal, I shot back. And it sure as hell doesn't erase the damage you've done. She stepped closer, reaching out as if to touch me, but I didn't move. Alex, please, she pleaded. Let's start over. We can rebuild this. I'll do whatever it takes. I stared at her, searching for any trace of sincerity, but all I saw was desperation. You're only here because of the money, I said bluntly. You think I don't know that? You found out about the inheritance and suddenly, you want to come back. Do you think I'm stupid? Her face turned pale, and she stammered, That's not true. I didn't even know about the inheritance until after I reached out. Liar, I said, my voice cold and sharp. You didn't want me when I was grieving. You didn't want me when I was broken. But now that I've picked myself up, now that there's money involved, you're suddenly interested. Save your breath, Lily. I see right through you. She started crying harder, her shoulders shaking. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Alex, but I'm begging you, please give me a chance. I shook my head. You had your chance. You had years of chances, and you threw it all away. This conversation is over. I turned to go back inside, but her voice stopped me. Alex, wait, she cried. What about everything we've built together? What about us? I glanced back at her, my expression hardened. There is no us, Lily. Not anymore. I walked inside and locked the door, ignoring the sound of her sobs on the other side. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of finality. She could cry, plead, and manipulate all she wanted, but I was done being her safety net. The following day, Jessica called with updates on the divorce. She's already trying to contest the terms, she said, but we've got the evidence to back you up. She doesn't have a leg to stand on. Good, I replied. Let's keep moving forward. As the divorce proceedings loomed, I prepared myself for the battles ahead. Lily had underestimated me once, but I wouldn't let it happen again. This was my chance to reclaim my life, free from her betrayal and lies. And I wasn't going to let her, or anyone else, take that away from me. The day of the divorce hearing arrived, and I walked into the courtroom with a quiet resolve. Lily was already there, sitting at the table with her lawyer, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She looked worn, her usual polished demeanor replaced by something more frantic and fragile. It was clear she was on edge, and that only fueled my determination. My lawyer, Jessica, gave me a reassuring nod as we took our seats. We've got this, Alex, she said confidently. Her attempts to contest the terms are baseless. Just stick to the facts. The proceedings began, and Lily's lawyer immediately launched into a narrative that painted her as a victim. He claimed she had acted out of emotional distress, that our marriage had been strained long before her affair, and that she deserved a fair share of the inheritance because of the years we had spent together. I clenched my fists under the table, but I kept my expression neutral. The lies didn't surprise me, but they still stung. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, took a deep breath, and laid out the truth. I loved my wife. I began, my voice steady. I supported her, stood by her through every challenge, and gave her everything I could. But when I needed her the most, when I was grieving the loss of my parents, she wasn't there. Instead, she chose to betray me. She left me for another man and made it clear that our marriage meant nothing to her. I paused, letting my words sink in before continuing. Now, she's here, claiming she's entitled to a share of an inheritance she had no part in earning. An inheritance she didn't even know about until she realized she needed money. This isn't about love or fairness. It's about greed. Jessica presented the evidence we had gathered, the messages between Lily and her lover, the financial records showing how she had drained our joint accounts before leaving, and even statements from mutual friends who confirmed her behavior during our separation. The courtroom was silent as the evidence piled up, each piece painting a clearer picture of Lily's true intentions. Lily's lawyer tried to counter, arguing that the affair was a mistake born out of emotional turmoil and that it didn't negate her contributions to our marriage. But Jessica was relentless, pointing out the inconsistencies in their arguments and emphasizing the undeniable facts. When Lily took the stand, she broke down in tears, pleading for the court to see her side. "I know I made mistakes," she said, her voice shaking, "but I never stopped loving Alex. I didn't know how to handle everything. I thought leaving was the right choice at the time, but I was wrong. I see that now." Her performance was convincing, but I could see through it. This wasn't remorse, it was desperation. She wasn't fighting for our marriage. She was fighting for the money. After hours of arguments and testimonies, the judge finally delivered the ruling. Based on the evidence presented, it is clear that the actions of Mrs. Harris demonstrate a breach of trust and a lack of contribution to the inheritance in question. Therefore, the court rules in favor of Mr. Harris. Mrs. Harris will not be entitled to any portion of the inheritance. Relief washed over me as the words sank in. I had won. The truth had prevailed, and Lily's attempts to manipulate the situation had failed. As we left the courtroom, Jessica turned to me with a smile. "You did great, Alex. This chapter is finally over." I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. But as I walked out of the courthouse, I saw Lily standing by the steps, her face a mixture of anger and sadness. She approached me hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Alex, I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. For everything." I looked at her, searching for sincerity, but I found none. "Sorry doesn't undo the damage you caused, Lily," I said firmly. "You made your choices. Now you have to live with them." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone on the courthouse steps. This time, I didn't feel the familiar pang of heartbreak or regret. I felt free. The legal battle was over, but more importantly, I had reclaimed my dignity and my life. For the first time in years, I was in control of my own destiny, and I wasn't going to waste another second looking back. The weeks following the court's decision brought a strange sense of quiet to my life. For the first time in years, there was no looming fight, no tense confrontation waiting around the corner. It was just me, my thoughts, and a future that finally felt like mine to shape. I threw myself into the process of rebuilding. The inheritance, though substantial, wasn't a free pass to happiness. It was a tool, one I intended to use wisely. I met with financial advisors, carefully mapping out plans for investment and philanthropy. The bakery my parents had dreamed of expanding was one of my first priorities. I decided to renovate it into a thriving centerpiece for the community, a tribute to their legacy and love. Despite the progress, there were moments when the silence felt heavier than the noise of the past. Nights in the house I once shared with Lily were a reminder of what I had lost. Not her, but the version of my life I had once believed in. It wasn't easy to shake the memories, but I reminded myself that those memories were from a chapter that had already ended. Friends and family who had stayed by my side through the turmoil began to notice the change in me. "You seem lighter, Alex," my sister commented one evening over dinner. "Like you've finally let it all go." "I guess I have," I admitted. "There's no point in holding on to what's already gone. I've got too much ahead of me to stay stuck in the past." That mindset guided me as I started to explore new possibilities. Travel had always been something I dreamed of, but never prioritized. Now, I booked a trip to Italy, a place my parents had always talked about visiting but never got the chance to. Wandering through cobblestone streets, tasting foods they would have loved, I felt a connection to them that was bittersweet but healing. It was during one of those quiet moments abroad, standing on a terrace overlooking the Amalfi Coast, that I realized just how far I had come. The man I saw in my reflection wasn't the same Alex who had been betrayed, abandoned, and broken. He was someone stronger, someone who had faced the worst and come out on the other side with a deeper understanding of his own worth. But life has a way of testing your resolve just when you think you've moved on. One evening, as I scrolled through my emails, a familiar name popped up in my inbox. Lily. The subject line read, "One last chance to talk." I stared at it for a long time, debating whether to even open it. Part of me wanted to delete it without a second thought, but another part, the part that still wanted closure, clicked on it. The email was long, filled with apologies and justifications. She wrote about her regret, how she realized too late that what we had was special, and how she wished she could undo the mistakes she had made. But what stood out most was her plea, "Please, Alex, give me a chance to explain in person. I just need to see you one more time." I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, letting out a heavy sigh. The old me might have entertained the idea, might have hoped there was something redeemable in her words. But the new me knew better. This wasn't about reconciliation. It was about her guilt and her desperation to absolve herself. I didn't respond. Instead, I went for a walk along the coast, the salty breeze clearing my mind. Lily's email was a reminder of how far I had come, of the boundaries I had learned to set. I didn't owe her anything, not a conversation, not forgiveness, not a second of my time. The next morning, I deleted the email without a second thought. It felt like closing the final door on a chapter that had long since ended. Back home, the bakery renovations were nearing completion. Seeing the community rally around the project, sharing their excitement and memories, brought me a sense of fulfillment I hadn't felt in years. This was where I belonged, creating something meaningful, something that would last. The inheritance had given me freedom, but it was the choices I made that gave me peace. Every day, I woke up knowing that my life was my own again, shaped not by betrayal or loss, but by resilience and hope. And that, more than anything, felt like victory. The grand reopening of the bakery was a day I would never forget. The sun shone brightly over the newly renovated storefront, its polished windows reflecting the crowd that had gathered outside. Friends, family, and neighbors filled the street, their chatter and laughter creating a hum of excitement that resonated deep within me. The new sign, Harris Family Bakery and Cafe, gleamed above the entrance, a tribute to my parents and the legacy they had left behind. The smell of fresh bread and pastries wafted through the air, drawing smiles from familiar faces as they waited for the doors to open. This was more than just a business. It was a testament to perseverance, a symbol of starting over. As I stood at the entrance, greeting guests with handshakes and hugs, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the loss. It all felt like a distant memory, a storm that had passed, leaving the air clearer than ever before. I was no longer the man defined by what had been taken from him. I was someone who had reclaimed his life, piece by piece. "Alex, this is incredible," my sister said, beaming as she approached me with her kids in tow. "Mom and Dad would be so proud." Her words struck a chord. I could almost see my parents standing beside me, my dad with his proud smile and my mom fussing over the arrangements, making sure everything was just right. They weren't here in person, but their presence was palpable in every detail. The recipes, the decor, the warmth that filled the space. As the ribbon was cut and the crowd began to pour inside, I took a moment to soak it all in. The bakery was alive again, filled with the sounds of laughter, the clinking of coffee cups, and the hum of conversations. It was exactly what I had envisioned during those dark days when hope felt like a foreign concept. Throughout the day, I mingled with customers, sharing stories and listening to theirs. Many of them had memories tied to the old bakery, birthdays, anniversaries, simple mornings spent enjoying a cup of coffee. Hearing their gratitude reminded me why I had fought so hard to rebuild. This wasn't just for me. It was for everyone who had ever walked through these doors and found a little bit of joy. Later that evening, as the crowd began to thin out, I sat at one of the corner tables, watching the last rays of sunlight filter through the windows. The cafe was quiet now, the hum of activity replaced by a peaceful stillness. I sipped a cup of coffee, savoring the moment. A familiar voice broke the silence. "Mind if I join you?" I looked up to see Emily, a close friend who had been there for me through some of my toughest moments. She was holding a slice of the bakery's signature apple pie, a warm smile on her face. "Of course," I said, gesturing to the seat across from me. As we talked, I found myself laughing more than I had in years. Emily had a way of making even the heaviest topics feel light, her humor and insight cutting through the noise. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of something new, hope, possibility, maybe even happiness. "You've done something amazing here, Alex," she said, her gaze sincere. It's not just a bakery. It's a reminder that life doesn't end when things fall apart. Sometimes, that's when it really begins. Her words stayed with me long after she left, resonating in the quiet of the empty cafe. She was right. This wasn't just the end of one chapter. It was the beginning of another. And for the first time in years, I was excited about what the future might hold. As I locked up for the night and stepped into the cool evening air, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. The road ahead was uncharted, but I was ready to walk it, one step at a time. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I was free, I was whole, and I was finally living the life I deserved.